Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name's Stephen. I'm a traditionally published fantasy author. Today I'm going to be talking about NaNoWriMo. This is the month of November, which is dedicated every year to writing a novel where people focus on it every day as much as possible to try and get 50,000 words or a good chunk of their book done, and it's a community thing. But I'm going to talk today why I don't think it's actually a good idea. Now I'm going to talk about the pros first, what I think is really good about it, and then I'll come on to the negatives. Now I'm sure there'll be some people downvoting it just because I'm saying I don't think you should do it, but as ever I'm going to explore the good and the bad in this and try to explain my points so you understand why I think it has its benefits, but why I also think it has drawbacks and perhaps you shouldn't do it. Let's start with some of the benefits first and the positives of NaNoWriMo. The whole organisation of this, the whole kind of bringing people together, I think is really good. It brings attention to writing, it makes people focus on it for a particular period and time, and also encourages them to take it a little bit more seriously. Perhaps if you're just pursuing writing as a hobby, this idea of perhaps getting closer to finishing a novel or actually doing your first novel, I think is really, really positive. The other benefit of this is, of course, community. All of this promotion, all of the talk of the fact that there is this large group of people online that are all doing it, I think it's a really positive thing because you have other people that are in the same boat as you. You're all working on the same thing. You're all striving to try and reach that target, whatever it is that you've set for the month. Now, I know it's not writing a novel in an entire month. That isn't the goal. It's to try and do as much as possible as you can within the month of November. And having a focused time and a focused period of the year on it, I think is a really good idea, as long as you spend some time before this planning it. You don't try and just go in and write the book completely cold with no idea of where you're going or what you're going to do and just every day sit down and write a bunch of stuff. You could do that. You could just brainstorm it every day and just completely make it up as you go along. But I think it would be really inconsistent. I think if you don't have a plan, that the further you go into the book, the more erratic it's going to be, the more weird, the more difficult perhaps to edit at a later stage. Whereas if you have some kind of a plan for what you're going to do over the course of November, I think that would really be a benefit, because even when you're starting to struggle, you don't need to think as much about, all right, what am I doing, what am I writing today, because I have something in place that will guide you, and I think that would help. The other good aspect about community is, of course, helping you to find your tribe. If you're a new writer and you don't have anybody local to you who is in a writing group or friends who are also writers, then it can be really difficult to talk to people about all the struggles that you're going through, whether you're working on your first book or it's your 10th book, or you're trying to self-publish, or you're trying to be traditionally published, whatever it might be. I think NaNoWriMo is really good for bringing people together. You can find contacts, maybe people who are working in the same genre as you, so you can have in-depth conversations. Maybe you can find people who will be beta readers for you, and in turn you'll work with them. So I think in terms of the community side of that, Nano is really, really good. Another good aspect about NaNoWriMo is that hopefully it'll teach you good practices. It'll get you in a rhythm as well. Because if you're trying to write every day, you're also trying to create some time every day in order to do that and fitting in around everything else. And that is a good habit, because most traditionally published and a lot of self-published authors also have full-time or part-time jobs. And some people often say to me and others, how do you find the time to write? As if it's extra time that we can acquire. It isn't. It's simply about organising your life, missing out on some things, not doing certain things so that you can write. And I think Nano teaches you some good habits. It'll help you to realise what is a priority for today, what can you not do today, and you can hold off until tomorrow and use that time to write instead. It also hopefully encourages you to realise you can write in 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And I think everybody could find half an hour in their day to write. It doesn't need to be a couple of hours slot or 4 hour slot. If you can just write for half an hour a day, that's really, really good. Half an hour as often as possible, because I think writing every day can be detrimental. So learning the rhythms, getting used to writing often or most days is good with Nano. And just getting your brain into that kind of mindset of working on a story over a long period of time. And even if you're doing it over a month and it's not a full novel, you're constantly building on something that you've done before. And there's a lot of lessons, I think, in finishing a novel that you can't really understand until you've got to the end of it. And Nano is a really good start for doing that. Of course, the best thing about NaNoWriMo is that it's a good Kickstarter in a way for the full novel. You've done hopefully a big chunk of the book. You're excited about it, you're energized about it, you're in depth, and it's really rumbling through your head, and you're working on it all of the time because you're constantly thinking about it and constantly writing it every day. And that's what it's like being a writer anyway, that it's constantly in the back of your mind no matter what you're doing, whether you're at work or doing something completely different. I think it's always good to have it ticking over in your brain. Now let's talk about some of the negative sides of NaNoWriMo. The first is that it's not sustainable. I understand that the goal of this is to kickstart you writing a novel, and you're supposed to write every day of the month. But if you look at it in a more realistic terms, writing every day and trying to do as much as you can't continue to do that at the same pace as you would during the month of November. I've heard of people say they put things on hold, they get rid of all their plans, they try and clear as much time as possible so that it can focus on this novel on the month of November, which is fine. But beyond that, you can't then keep doing that for the rest of the months and the rest of your life and many, many years to come, because you'll completely burn out, you'll have no energy, you'll have probably no sleep, because a lot of people also cut sleep in this month because they're trying to get as much as they can and fit it in and everything else in their life. And the other thing is, if you're writing so intensely every single day, it'll come to a certain point where the tank is dry. I honestly believe that when you're writing, you need to have some breaks, because if you're constantly sort of tapping that well, that creative well, eventually you'll just burn out. You'll sit down and there's nothing there. And it's not writer's block. It's not that you don't know what you're going to write. It's when you just sit down, you just suddenly sort of lose the ability in a way because you're so mentally drained. And I think it is like a muscle. You have to exercise it regularly. But if you do it too often, there's nothing there. And I've had this happen to me before. So sometimes forcing myself to take a break is actually the best thing. And trying to do this every single day for a year or more, you can't do it. Related to that is, of course, it's not realistic. It's good to have targets for books that you're working on. I do that because I have deadlines, and I think in general they can be quite positive, just to keep a person motivated, just to keep them moving forward, so they're constantly aware that I'm 60k through this novel and I think it's going to be 100,000. They feel like they're making progress. I think that is good. But long term, fitting it in around having a life, having a job, spending time with your family, hobbies, going out and doing exercise, just other things away from writing, it's not realistic there again. And it needs to be something much more in tune with the rest of your life, rather than it just being an intense thing every single day. The other negative thing I think about NaNoWriMo is that it sets false expectations. It gives the person an impression that you can write a book in a couple of months. Now, some authors, yes, there's always going to be someone crawling out of the woodwork going, oh, well, I've written a book in 3 months and I do that all the time and blah, blah, blah. Yes, fine. Realistically, most people, including myself, a book is a marathon, is not a sprint. And Nano gives this impression of doing as much as you can in an intense period. And if you just do that for like maybe 3 months, maybe you can finish a novel. Maybe you can, but you'll absolutely be burnt out, and God knows what it'll do to the rest of your life in that period if you completely ignore everything else. A book can take a year or 2 years, and that's perfectly fine. The fastest I've ever written a novel is 6 months. That's because I was doing it full time. Alongside my job, it takes me anywhere from 8 to 11 months to write a book. And that's just my average. There are some that can do it in faster, maybe 5, 6 months, 7 months, and that's their kind of average. But I know where I am in terms of my deadlines. I know how much I have to write every month, so that by so many months I hit my deadline, I hit my goal, and I've never missed one yet, because I'm being realistic about how many words I can write a day in a session when I sit down, and how many words I can do per month. And I've worked this out by practicing it and by doing it several times. And it's the idea of that being a marathon there again. It is not a sprint to write a first draft. As I've often said in some of my other videos, being a writer is about longevity. It's about producing a body of work over many books to hopefully have a career, and if the money from enough books comes together, you can have a full-time income. That's the goal, that's what I want to do, that's what many other authors want to do. A lot of don't get there. They write alongside their jobs, and that's just how it is. That's being realistic, because most aren't going to be the household names that you know. There are thousands of other writers. Walk into any bookshop and immediately you can see who the big boys and girls are but then all the shelves are filled by everybody else, all the rest of us that are doing okay, that are maybe known, we have followings, but we're not having TV shows and films and, 40, 50, 60 books because we can write full time. This idea of instant gratification isn't healthy because you have to produce a number of books, and a book, as I said, is a marathon, and you have to produce several books over several years. So in some ways I think Nano is a little bit of a gimmick. It can be useful for all the reasons I've said earlier, but long term I don't think it's very healthy for an individual. So if you do NaNoWriMo, I think go in with realistic expectations, have fun, make connections, try and find a community, try and find writers who are similar to you that you'd work with after the month of November, and thereafter set more realistic guidelines and deadlines for yourself in terms of monthly word count. But definitely keep going with that novel, get to the end of that first draft, and there'll be so much to learn from the process and then what comes after during the editing process. And I think that's really important too, because the first draft is just the beginning. And even if you get an agent, you still have to work with them to edit the book and get it ready before you submit it. And then even if an editor says yes at a publisher, you'll then spend even more time working with them before it's ready for publication. So this idea of constantly revising the book and working on it is actually a big chunk of the book, and this first draft is just the beginning. So have a go at Nano if you want. Be realistic, don't punish yourself if you fall behind, you don't hit that magic kind of number of 50k or whatever you've set for yourself, but be mindful of some of the downsides of it, look after yourself and have fun really with it. So that's what I'm going to talk about for today. I'll be back next week with another video.